Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step quietly into the soft grey light of an 1860s morning where the world feels both familiar and strangely unsettled. You open your eyes not to alarms or glowing screens, but to the slow creak of wood, the faint rustle of fabric, and the distant, uncertain rhythm of a country at war with itself. The air is cool against your skin, carrying the faint scent of ash from last night's fire, and something else you cannot quite name. Maybe it is worry, maybe it is history pressing in, and here is the thing you quickly realise with a hint of dry humour. You probably would not last a week without complaining about the coffee situation alone. It is not really coffee. It is something roasted, stretched, improvised, and politely called coffee. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and local time down below. It is always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from. Now dim the lights. You begin your day not with certainty, but with quiet calculation. The bed beneath you is narrow, its straw mattress uneven, reminding you of every shift in your sleep. Blankets are heavy but not particularly soft. You stretch slowly, listening. That is the first habit you learn. Listening. In this world, sound carries meaning. A distant wagon means trade or movement. Raised voices might mean tension. Silence, oddly enough, can feel the most unsettling of all. A rooster calls somewhere nearby a reliable, if slightly overconfident timekeeper. Morning has arrived whether you are ready or not. You swing your feet onto the floor, feeling the chill of wooden boards that have not yet warmed. There is no rushing. Everything here unfolds at a human pace, though beneath it runs a quiet urgency. War has a way of doing that, even far from the front lines. You dress in layers that speak more of practicality than comfort. Linen, wool, cotton, if you are fortunate. Clothing in this time is not about fashion in the modern sense. It is about durability, about making do. A well-maintained dress or coat might last years. You notice small repairs everywhere, neatly sewn patches, reinforced seams. Nothing is wasted. Even the smallest scrap of fabric has a future purpose. A widely accepted fact of the time is that textile production had become increasingly strained as the war progressed, especially in the Confederacy, where blockades limited access to imported goods. So you find yourself wearing garments that may have been mended multiple times, each stitch a quiet record of survival. It is strangely comforting in a way. Your clothing carries history with you, and yet there is also a curious detail you might not expect. Some people in these years would dye warm clothes with homemade solutions, using things like walnut shells, or even tea to refresh their appearance. It's not exactly high fashion, but it works well enough in dim light and polite company. You can almost imagine someone proudly saying, "Yes, this is this season's shade of brown." You move toward the hearth, the true heart of the home. Fire is everything here. Warmth, cooking, light. Without it, the day does not truly begin. You crouch slightly, coaxing last night's embers back to life. It takes patience, a careful breath, a bit of kindling, a watchful eye. When the flame finally catches, it feels like a small victory. And in a time like this, small victories matter. The house itself feels both sturdy and fragile. Wooden beams, simple furniture, perhaps a table worn smooth by years of use. If you are in a rural area, Your home might be isolated, surrounded by fields or trees. If you are in a town, neighbours are closer, though not necessarily closer in spirit. The war has a way of drawing invisible lines between people who once shared meals and laughter. Historians still argue whether civilian morale in these early years was more resilient or more fragile than later accounts suggest. Some letters describe optimism, even excitement. Others reveal quiet dread, a sense that something irreversible has begun. As you stand there in the soft glow of the fire, you feel both possibilities at once. Breakfast is simple, very simple. Cornbread perhaps, a bit of salted meat if supplies allow, maybe that questionable coffee substitute made from roasted chicory or grains. You take a sip and pause. It is not terrible, but it is also not coffee as you know it. You adjust quickly. People here have learned to adjust to many things. You eat slowly, partly because there is no reason to rush, and partly because stretching food is a habit that settles deep into your bones. Every bite is considered. Waste is not just frowned upon, it is almost unthinkable. Outside, the world is waking. You hear footsteps, distant voices, the creak of a wagon wheels. Life continues even as the war reshapes it in subtle and not so subtle ways. You step outside, the air crisp and carrying the scent of earth and smoke. The sky is wide open, indifferent to human conflict. And yet, the war is here too, just not in the way you might expect. It lives in conversations that stop when you approach, in glances exchanged between neighbours, in the absence of someone who used to stand in this very spot, now miles away in uniform. You notice how people carry themselves. There is a certain tension, a quiet awareness. Even routine tasks feel slightly altered. Fetching water, tending animals, sweeping the yard. Everything continues, but nothing is quite untouched. If you are in a household with divided loyalties, the atmosphere can feel especially delicate. One person may support the Union, another the Confederacy. These are not just political opinions, they are deeply personal, often tied to identity, family, and survival. Conversations must be navigated carefully, like stepping across a floor that might creak at any moment. You begin to understand that daily life here is not defined by dramatic moments, but by a constant balancing act. Normalcy and disruption, hope and fear, routine and uncertainty. The sun rises higher, casting longer light across the ground. The day is fully underway now. Tasks await. Work does not pause for war. Fields must be tended, clothes washed, meals prepared. There is always something that needs doing, and as you move into the rhythm of the day, you carry with you a quiet awareness. This is history, yes, but it does not feel like history from the inside. It feels like life, messy, uncertain, sometimes mundane, sometimes overwhelming. You take one last look at the horizon, the calm stretching out before you. It almost feels peaceful. Almost. Then you turn back toward the house, toward the work, toward whatever this day will bring. You continue dressing now, more aware that every layer you pull on is not just for warmth or modesty, but for meaning. The fabric brushes against your skin slightly rough, reminding you that comfort is a quiet luxury in this time. You smooth it down, adjusting cuffs and ties, noticing how even the smallest detail carries weight. Clothing here is not just about keeping warm. It tells a story sometimes more honestly than words. You glance around the room, catching sight of others preparing themselves. There is a rhythm to it, practiced and quiet. No one wastes movement. Every gesture feels purposeful, shaped by years of habit, and the growing pressure of wartime scarcity. A button is fastened carefully, not hurried. A hem is checked, fingers tracing a repair that must hold for another day. A commonly accepted historical fact is that by the early 1860s, mass-produced clothing was beginning to emerge in urban areas, especially in the north, where factories could supply uniforms and basic garments in standardized sizes. But for most civilians, especially outside cities, clothing is still handmade or altered repeatedly. You are wearing something that has likely been adjusted, resized and repaired more times than you can count. It fits more or less, and that is enough. You step toward a small mirror, if you are fortunate enough to have one. The glass is imperfect, slightly warped, turning your reflection into something softer, less precise. You study your face, noticing how simple grooming becomes an act of quiet dignity. Hair is combed, though not always neatly. There is no abundance of oils or perfumes here, only what can be spared. And yet people still care. That might surprise you. In a world pressed by war, appearance does not disappear. It becomes more intentional. A neatly tied ribbon, a clean collar, a polished pair of boots if available. These are small acts of control in a life that often feels unpredictable. There is also something else, something more subtle. Clothing can signal loyalty, though rarely in obvious ways. A particular shade of grey or blue, a certain cut of fabric, even the way a hat is worn. These details might pass unnoticed by an outsider, but here they speak volumes. You learn quickly to observe, without staring to notice, without drawing attention. There is a curious detail that lingers in the background of this time. Some individuals, particularly in border states, would intentionally dress in neutral or ambiguous styles to avoid suspicion. It is a kind of quiet camouflage, not for the battlefield, but for everyday life. You can imagine the careful thought behind each choice. Not too bold, not too plain, just enough to pass. You adjust your sleeves again, suddenly aware of how visible you are. It is not fear exactly, but a heightened sense of being observed. In a time of divided loyalties, even appearance can invite questions, and questions are not always safe. You step outside, once more joining the slow flow of morning activity. People pass by, each carrying their own version of the day. A woman balances a basket, her dress faded but neatly maintained. A man adjusts his hat, his coat slightly worn at the elbows. Children dart between them, their clothing a patchwork of growth and necessity. You notice how quickly you begin to read these details. A clean outfit might suggest access to resources. A heavily patched one hints at struggle, but it is never that simple. Pride can hide hardship, and hardship can be worn with surprising grace. There is also the matter of uniforms, though you are not at the front lines. Occasionally you see someone in military attire passing through or returning briefly. The sight is striking. The uniform stands out, structured and purposeful, a sharp contrast to the softer, more varied clothing of civilians. It carries authority, but also a quiet heaviness. You catch yourself watching, wondering what it feels like to wear such a thing, to carry the war so visibly. And then you look down at your own clothes, realizing that the war is here too, just less obvious. It is in the fabric you wear, the shortages you navigate, the choices you make each morning. Historians continue to debate how much clothing truly reflected political allegiance during the Civil War years. Some argue that symbolism was widespread and easily recognised, while others suggest that practicality often overruled any desire to display loyalty. As you stand there, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. People signal when they can, hide when they must, and adapt constantly. You walk a little farther, noticing a group gathered near a fence. Their conversation is low but animated. You catch fragments, talk of supplies of shipments, delayed of fabric becoming harder to find. Someone mentions a relative who has started weaving at home again, returning to older methods out of necessity. It feels like time folding back on itself. You pause, touching the edge of your sleeve again. It is sturdy, but you can already imagine the day when it will need repair. That thought does not feel distant, it feels inevitable. There is a quiet ingenuity in how people manage. Old garments are taken apart and remade into new ones. Children's clothes are handed down, adjusted again and again. Even worn-out pieces find a second life as quilts or cleaning cloths. Nothing truly disappears. It transforms. You begin to see clothing not as a fixed thing, but as part of a cycle. Creation, use, repair, reuse. It mirrors the larger rhythm of life here, where survival depends on flexibility and resourcefulness. The sun climbs higher, warming the air slightly. You feel it on your shoulders, a gentle contrast to the earlier chill. Around you, the town or countryside continues its steady movement. There's no grand announcement of the day's importance. It simply unfolds one moment at a time. And yet, beneath it all, there is a quiet awareness. The war is shaping even this, even how you dress, how you present yourself, how you are seen. It is subtle, but constant. You take a slow breath, adjusting your posture, settling into the role of this day. Whatever it brings you will meet it as others do, with quiet endurance, with small acts of care, with attention to the details that keep life moving forward. You glance once more at those around you, at the varied fabrics and careful repairs, at the unspoken messages woven into every thread. Then without ceremony, you step forward, becoming part of the living pattern. You begin to feel it before you even reach the kitchen space again. A subtle shift in the air, warmer now, carrying the faint scent of something cooking. Not rich, not abundant, but steady, reliable. The kind of smell that promises just enough to keep you going. You step inside, noticing how the room has already changed since earlier. The fire has taken hold, its glow steady and practical. Someone moves near the hearth, stirring, adjusting, working with quiet focus. There is no wasted motion here. Cooking in this time is less about creativity and more about careful management. You take your place, watching, learning. A widely recognised historical reality is that food shortages became a defining part of civilian life during the Civil War, especially in the Confederacy, where Union blockades cut off key supplies. Even in the North, prices rose and certain goods became harder to obtain. What you eat depends not only on what is available, but on what can be preserved, stretched and substituted. You glance at the table. Cornmeal sits in a worn container ready to become bread or mush. A small portion of salted pork rests nearby its presence, both reassuring and limited. This is not a meal you can indulge in. It is one you must respect. You watch as water is added carefully, as the mixture thickens, as the fire is adjusted to avoid waste. Every step feels deliberate. There is an unspoken awareness that mistakes cost more than time. They cost food. You help where you can, stirring slowly, feeling the resistance of the mixture. It is simple, almost meditative, and yet you cannot ignore the quiet calculation behind it all. How much to use? How much to save? How long this supply might last? There is a curious detail that lingers in these kitchens. When coffee became scarce, many households turned to substitutes made from roasted chicory, dandelion roots, or even burned grains. Some recipes became surprisingly popular, passed from neighbour to neighbour, like small secrets. You take a sip again, this time more thoughtfully. It still is not coffee, but it carries warmth, and that matters. You sit down as the meal is served. Portions are modest. You notice how no one reaches immediately. There is a pause, almost like a silent agreement. Everyone takes what they need, not what they want. It is a small but powerful discipline. You taste the cornbread. It is dense, slightly coarse, but filling. The salted meat adds flavour, though, sparingly. You chew slowly, aware of each bite. There is something grounding about it. Food here is not entertainment. It is survival shared quietly. Outside you hear movement again. The world does not stop for meals, but meals anchor the day. They provide a moment to gather, to observe, to think. You notice how conversation unfolds around the table. It is careful, measured. Topics shift gently. Weather work, small observations. The war is present, but not always spoken aloud. When it is, voices lower slightly, as if the words themselves carry weight. Someone mentions supplies running low in a nearby town. Another speaks of a shipment that never arrived. You listen, piecing together a larger picture. Food is not just a household concern. It is a network of uncertainty stretching far beyond this room. Historians still debate how much civilian hunger influenced morale during the war years. Some accounts describe resilience and adaptation, while others hint at growing frustration and quiet desperation. As you sit here, you sense both possibilities again layered into everyday life. You finish your portion, resisting the instinct to reach for more. It is not that you are still hungry, though you might be. It is that you understand the balance. Taking more now means less later. This awareness settles into you, quickly becoming second nature. After the meal, nothing is wasted. Scraps are saved, utensils cleaned with care, surfaces wiped down. Even the smallest leftover might become part of the next meal. You help where you can, noticing how every action contributes to a larger system of survival. You step outside once more, the sunlight stronger now. The air feels different after the warmth of the kitchen, fresher but also more exposed. You take a moment to breathe, letting the sounds of the day settle around you. Nearby you notice a small garden. Rows of vegetables, modest but vital. This is another layer of food security, one that depends on time, effort, and a bit of luck. You kneel slightly, touching the soil. It is dry in places, rich in others. You can almost feel the care that has gone into it. Gardens like these have become increasingly important during the war. They are not just supplements, they are lifelines. You imagine the quiet hope placed in each seed, each growing plant. There is also something else, something slightly unexpected. Some households have begun experimenting with unfamiliar ingredients, adapting recipes to whatever is available. It is not always successful. You can picture a meal that did not quite work, shared with polite smiles and quiet determination. You stand brushing your hands lightly. The day continues to unfold, and already you feel more connected to its rhythm. Food, clothing, routine. Each element ties into the next, forming a web of daily life that holds everything together. You glance back toward the house, toward the kitchen, where the fire still burns steadily. It feels like a centre point, a place of both comfort and constant effort. And as you turn to face the tasks ahead, you carry with you a new understanding. Survival here is not dramatic. It is built from small repeated actions, stirring, measuring, saving, sharing. The war may be fought elsewhere with noise and motion and visible conflict, but here behind the lines it is fought in quieter ways. In kitchens, in gardens, in the careful division of a single meal. You take a slow breath, the taste of cornbread still lingering faintly. Then you step forward into the rest of the day, already aware that every choice, no matter how small, matters. You drift back indoors as the light shifts your eyes, adjusting once again to the softer tones of the house. It feels quieter now, almost as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. You begin to notice the space more closely, not just as a shelter, but as a reflection of the lives unfolding inside it. The floor beneath your feet carries faint marks of years of use, scuffed in places where footsteps repeat the same paths each day. You follow one of those paths, instinctively moving from the hearth to the table, then towards a corner where a simple chair rests beside a small wooden chest. Nothing here is decorative without purpose. Everything earns its place. Homes in the 1860s, especially outside growing cities, tend to be modest in size and design. A widely accepted detail is that many families lived in 2 or 3 room structures, often combining cooking, eating and sleeping areas into shared spaces. Privacy, as you understand it, is limited. Life unfolds in overlapping layers, each person aware of the others in a constant, quiet way. You run your hand lightly along the table surface. It is worn smooth, the grain of the wood, softened by years of contact. Meals have been prepared here, letters written, conversations shared, decisions made. You can almost sense the accumulation of moments, each one leaving a subtle trace. There is a shelf nearby holding a few carefully arranged items. A small stack of dishes, a tin cup, perhaps a Bible or another well-used book. You notice how these objects are treated with care, not because they are rare in some grand sense, but because they are necessary. Replacement is not guaranteed. Preservation becomes a habit. You move toward a window, if it can be called that. The glass is uneven, slightly distorting the view outside. Light filters through in a soft, diffused way, casting gentle patterns across the room. It is not bright, but it is enough. You pause there, looking out at the world beyond, feeling both connected and separated. There's an interesting little detail about windows during this time. In some homes, especially in poorer areas, glass was scarce or expensive, so openings might be covered with oiled paper instead. It allowed light in while offering some protection from the elements. You imagine how different that would feel, the outside world reduced to shapes and shadows. You turn back into the room, noticing how the furniture is arranged with intention. The bed is placed near the warmest part of the house, close enough to the hearth to catch its heat during colder nights. Chairs are positioned where light is best during the day, making tasks like sewing or reading possible without strain. There is no excess here, but there is a kind of quiet order. You begin to appreciate how much thought goes into maintaining even this level of comfort. Every item has been acquired, built or repaired through effort. Nothing arrives easily. At the same time, you sense that not all homes feel the same. In wealthier households, particularly in certain northern cities, interiors could be more elaborate with upholstered furniture, decorative items and multiple rooms for different purposes. Yet even there, the war has begun to leave its mark. Supplies shift, priorities change, and a sense of uncertainty seeps in. Some researchers continue to examine how much domestic life truly changed during the war years versus how much remained rooted in older traditions. Letters and diaries offer glimpses, but they do not always agree. As you stand here, you feel that tension. The house is both stable and fragile, grounded in habit, yet touched by something larger. You notice a small detail near the hearth. A rug, if it can be called that, woven from scraps of fabric. Its colours are uneven, its edges slightly irregular, but it serves its purpose, adding a layer of warmth and comfort underfoot. It also tells a story. Each strip of cloth once belonged to something else. A dress, a shirt, a piece of a life now repurposed. You kneel slightly, tracing the pattern with your eyes. There is something deeply human in this kind of making do. It is not about perfection, it is about continuity. As you rise, you hear movement from another part of the house. Someone is working, perhaps mending clothes or preparing for the next task. The sound is soft, rhythmic, needle through fabric, thread pulled tight. It blends into the background, becoming part of the home's quiet language. You realise how much of daily life happens in these spaces away from the noise of battlefields. The war does not always arrive with drums and marching boots. Sometimes it is present in smaller ways, in the absence of new furniture, in the careful use of every object, in the way people adapt their surroundings to meet changing needs. There is also an emotional layer to these rooms. They hold memories both recent and distant. A chair that once belonged to someone now gone. A corner where a child used to play more freely before responsibilities grew heavier. The house becomes a container for these shifting moments. You walk slowly across the room again, your footsteps quieter now, as if you have learned something about how to move within this space. You feel a growing respect for the balance it maintains. Not luxurious, not easy, but steady. Outside, the light continues to change, casting longer shadows through the window. The day is moving forward, whether you notice it or not. Inside the house responds in its own way, adjusting to the rhythm of those who live within it. You pause near the doorway, taking one last look around. The table, the bed, the shelf, the rug, each piece fits into a larger whole, supporting a life that must continue despite everything happening beyond these walls. And as you step back out into the open air, you carry that sense of structure with you. A reminder that even in uncertain times, people build spaces that hold them together quietly, persistently, day after day. You step away from the doorway and into the steady pool of the day's work, where time is no longer measured by clocks, but by tasks waiting to be done. The sun has risen enough to cast a clearer light across the ground, and with it comes expectation. There is always something that needs your hands, your attention, your patience. You begin with what is closest. Perhaps it is water that must be carried, drawn from a well or nearby source. The bucket feels heavier than you expect, the handle pressing into your palm as you walk carefully, trying not to spill a drop. Each step is deliberate. Water is not something you take for granted here. Every movement reminds you of its value. Daily labour in the 1860s is shaped by necessity more than choice. A widely recognised reality is that most households depend on manual effort for nearly every task, from cooking and cleaning to farming and basic repairs. There are no machines humming quietly in the background, no hidden systems making life easier. It is all visible, all physical. You return with the water, setting it down with care. Already your body begins to understand the rhythm. Lift, carry, place, repeat. It is not dramatic, but it is constant. Nearby, someone is tending to laundry. You watch for a moment, noticing how much effort goes into what you might consider a simple chore. Water must be heated, soap measured sparingly, garments scrubbed and rinsed by hand. The fabric twists and strains under pressure, and you can almost feel the work in your own muscles just by observing. You join in, dipping your hands into the water. It is warm, but not comfortably so. The motion is repetitive, almost hypnotic, scrub, rinse, ring. You begin to see how tasks like this shape the day, not just physically but mentally. There is a quiet focus that settles in a narrowing of attention that leaves little room for distraction. At the same time, work here is rarely done in isolation. Even when people are not speaking, there is a shared presence. You hear the sounds of others nearby, a tool striking wood, a voice calling out, the faint rhythm of movement that ties everyone together. You move on to another task, perhaps helping to prepare for fieldwork if you are in a rural setting. Tools are gathered, inspected. Each one carries its own weight, both literal and symbolic. A hoe, a rake, a simple plough. These are extensions of the body necessary for survival. In many parts of the country, especially in agricultural regions, the war has pulled many men away from home, leaving women, older family members and even children to take on increased responsibility. This shift is well documented in personal accounts from the time where letters describe fields being managed by those who had never expected to do such work. You feel that shift now in the way tasks are distributed, in the quiet determination of those around you. There is a small but fascinating detail that surfaces in some of these accounts. In certain communities, women began forming informal groups to help each other with labour-intensive tasks, rotating from one household to another. It is not official, not recorded in any grand system, but it works. You can imagine the quiet coordination, the shared effort, the sense of mutual reliance. You step into the field, the soil uneven beneath your feet. The sun is stronger here, its warmth pressing gently against your back. You begin working the motion at first, unfamiliar, then gradually more natural. There is a rhythm to it like everything else. Break the soil, move forward, repeat. Time stretches differently in this space. Without the markers you are used to, it becomes fluid, shaped by effort rather than minutes. You feel your body adjusting, your mind settling into the pace. And yet the war is never entirely absent. It lingers in the background in conversations that drift across the field. Someone mentions a letter received. Another speaks of news from a nearby town. The details are incomplete, sometimes uncertain, but they carry weight. Some historians suggest that the home front became its own kind of battlefield, not through direct violence, but through the constant pressure of adaptation and loss. Others see it as a space of resilience where ordinary people found ways to continue despite extraordinary circumstances. As you work, you sense both interpretations woven together. You pause for a moment, straightening your back, wiping your hands against your clothing. The air feels heavier now, filled with the scent of earth and effort. You look around, noticing how everyone moves within their own pattern, yet remains connected to the whole. There is also a quiet pride in this labour. It is not spoken aloud, but it is there. Each task completed, each small success contributes to something larger. Survival is not an abstract idea here. It is built piece by piece, hour by hour. You return to the work, your movements more confident now. The repetition no longer feels foreign, it feels necessary. As the sun climbs higher, the pace may shift slightly, but it does not stop. There are always more tasks waiting, repairs to be made, animals to be tended, supplies to be checked. You begin to understand that work here is not just about productivity, it is about stability. It provides structure in a world that feels uncertain. It offers a sense of control, even if limited. You take another breath, feeling the weight of the day settle into your muscles. It is not easy, but it is steady. And as you continue moving from one task to the next, you carry with you a growing awareness. Behind the lines, far from the sound of battle, this is where the war is also lived. In the labour that sustains homes, in the hands that keep everything moving forward. You do not stop. You simply keep going, as everyone here does. You leave the field slowly, your hands still carrying the memory of the soil, your muscles settling into a quieter ache. The work does not end, but it shifts. It always shifts. And as you walk back toward the house and the spaces beyond it, you begin to notice something else woven into the fabric of this world. Not just labour, but the stark differences in who labours and under what conditions. You see them before anyone says anything. Figures moving with purpose, but not with the same autonomy you have felt. Their motions are practiced, efficient, yet shaped by something deeper than routine. You pause not out of curiosity alone, but because the atmosphere subtly changes. Conversations grow more careful, eyes move differently. Enslaved people are present in many parts of the country during this time, especially in the south, and their daily lives unfold under conditions that are both structured and deeply constrained. Their work overlaps with everything you have already seen. Cooking, cleaning, tending fields, maintaining households. Yet the meaning of that work is entirely different. You stand at the edge of it, aware that you are witnessing something both ordinary in its frequency and extraordinary in its weight. A woman moves past you carrying a bundle of laundry, her pace steady, her expression composed. A man works nearby, repairing a fence with quiet focus. There is skill in what they do, undeniable and practiced. At the same time, there is a boundary that cannot be ignored. Their time is not their own. Their choices are limited in ways that shape every moment. You begin to notice the small signals. A glance exchanged quickly between two people. A pause that lingers just slightly longer than expected. These are not accidents. They are part of a quiet language, one that exists beneath the surface of daily life. There is a lesser-known detail that emerges in personal accounts from the period. Enslaved individuals often developed subtle methods of communication using coded language songs or gestures to share information without drawing attention. It is not always obvious and it's not always safe, but it exists. You wonder how many conversations are happening just beyond your understanding. You walk a little farther, observing how work is organised. Tasks are assigned, completed, repeated. The rhythm is similar to what you have already experienced, yet the feeling is different. There is less room for personal pacing, less space for choice. You feel a quiet tension in the air, something unspoken but present. It is not constant, not always visible, but it lingers. At the same time, there are moments of resilience that stand out in quiet ways. A carefully maintained garden patch, a piece of clothing repaired with care, a shared glance that carries more meaning than words. These are not grand acts, but they matter. Some scholars continue to examine how enslaved communities maintained cultural identity and social bonds under such conditions. Oral traditions, music, and shared practices played a role, though the full extent is difficult to capture in written records. As you stand here, you sense that much of this life exists beyond what is easily documented. You notice a child nearby watching, learning. Childhood here is shaped by observation and adaptation. Skills are passed down, not always formally, but through repetition and necessity. The child mimics movements, absorbing the patterns of the day. You feel a shift within yourself, a deeper awareness of how layered this world is. What you saw earlier, the labour, the routines, the careful management of resources, all of it exists here too. But it is experienced through a different lens, one shaped by restriction and endurance. There is also the presence of uncertainty. The war has begun to alter the structure of slavery in ways that are not always predictable. In some areas, Union advances bring the possibility of freedom. In others, conditions tighten as those in power attempt to maintain control. You hear fragments of conversation, again quieter now. Words like movement escape risk. They are not spoken openly, but they are there. You do not fully understand the details, but you feel the weight of them. You step back slightly, giving space, aware that your presence changes the dynamic. Observation here carries responsibility. You cannot pretend this is just another part of the day. At the same time, life continues. Meals are prepared. Tasks are completed. The structure holds even as it begins to strain. You look around once more, noticing how the same sun that warmed your back in the field now shines on everyone here. The same air, the same ground, yet such different experiences of the same day. There is a quiet strength in what you see, not loud, not declared, but steady. It exists in the ability to continue to adapt, to find small moments of connection and meaning. You take a slow breath, feeling the complexity of it settle into you. This is not a simple story. It cannot be reduced to a single perspective. As you turn to move on, you carry that awareness with you. The understanding that behind the lines, life is not just about survival in the physical sense. It is also about navigating systems, relationships, and realities that shape each moment in profound ways. You walk forward, the sounds of the day returning around you. Work continues. Conversations shift. The rhythm persists. And you, now more aware than before, step carefully into the next part of this unfolding day. You move away from the heavier thoughts of the last moments, though they do not fully leave you. They linger quiet and persistent, like the echo of something important that cannot be ignored. And yet, as you step farther along the worn path, a different sound begins to reach you. Lighter, faster, almost out of place. Children. Their voices rise and fall in uneven bursts, laughter breaking through the steady rhythm of the day. It catches your attention immediately, not because it is rare, but because it feels fragile. You follow the sound drawn toward a small open space where a group of them has gathered. They are not idle. That is the first thing you notice. Even in play there is purpose. A boy crouches low, drawing lines in the dirt, with a stick mapping out some imagined boundary. Another stands watchfully, as if guarding a position. Two younger children chase each other in quick looping paths, their feet kicking up small clouds of dust. You pause at the edge, observing. Childhood here is not separate from the world around it. It blends into it, shaped by the same forces that guide everything else. A well-established detail from this period is that children often took on responsibilities at an early age, contributing to household work, farming and caregiving. Play exists, but it weaves itself between duties rather than replacing them. One child glances up at you briefly, then returns to the game. There is no hesitation, no sense of performance. What they are doing matters to them, even if it looks simple from the outside. You step closer, noticing how their games reflect what they see around them. Small sticks become rifles. Lines in the dirt mark imagined territories. Roles are assigned quickly. Someone leads. Someone follows. Someone pretends to fall, only to spring back up again moments later. It is both playful and unsettling. You hear one of them call out instructions, voice sharp with enthusiasm. The others respond, adjusting their movements, shifting positions. It mirrors something larger, something they have absorbed without needing to be taught directly. There is a curious detail recorded in several personal diaries from the era. Children sometimes played at war using makeshift uniforms, even crafting miniature flags or insignias from scraps of cloth. It was not always encouraged, but it was common enough to be noted. You can almost see that instinct here in the way they organise themselves. A girl nearby sits slightly apart, weaving something from bits of grass. Her hands move quickly, skillfully. She watches the others with quiet interest, occasionally smiling but not joining in. You wonder how much she has already learned about where she fits, about what is expected. You lower yourself slightly, bringing your view closer to theirs. The ground feels warm beneath your hand, the dust fine and dry. You notice the details more clearly now. Bare feet hardened by use, clothing patched and repatched, sleeves too short or too long. Growth happens faster than fabric can keep up. And yet there is energy here, a kind of brightness that persists despite everything. Some historians have suggested that wartime accelerated the transition from childhood to adulthood, especially in rural areas where labour demands increased. Others point out that children still found ways to carve out moments of play, maintaining a sense of normal life, even as circumstances shifted. Watching this scene, you sense that both views hold truth. A sudden shout breaks your focus. One of the children has tripped, landing hard enough to draw a brief silence. You see the quick intake of breath, the pause before reaction. Then just as quickly the child pushes up, brushing off dirt with a determined motion. No tears, not this time. The game resumes, slightly altered but still intact. You notice how resilience appears early here, not as something taught directly, but as something absorbed through daily experience. There is little room for prolonged hesitation. The day moves forward, and so must they. You shift your weight, standing again, taking in the broader scene. Beyond the play, you can see signs of responsibility waiting. A bucket set aside, ready to be carried. A smaller tool leaning against a fence. These children will return to work soon enough, stepping back into roles that require focus and effort. You catch a fragment of conversation between two older children. They speak quietly, discussing something they overheard. News of a battle perhaps, or the movement of troops. The details are incomplete, but the tone is serious. They understand more than they let on. You feel a subtle change in your own perspective. It becomes clear that growing up here is not defined by a single moment, but by a series of small adjustments. Each day adds something, a new task, a new awareness, a new understanding of how the world works. You take a slow breath, letting the sound of their voices settle into the background again. It softens the edges of everything else, even if only briefly. As you begin to step away, one of the younger children glances at you again, this time with a quick smile. It is fleeting but genuine, a reminder that even here, even now, there are moments of lightness. You walk on the laughter fading behind you, replaced once more by the steady sounds of work and movement. The day continues, carrying everyone forward in its quiet, persistent way. And as you move into whatever comes next, you carry with you the image of that small circle of play, not untouched by the war, but not entirely defined by it either. A fragile balance held together one moment at a time. You follow the road as it widens slightly, the packed earth marked by wagon ruts and footprints layered over one another. The air feels different here, busier somehow, carrying a mix of voices, movement, and a faint tension that seems to hover just beneath the surface. You are approaching the market. It reveals itself gradually. First a cluster of people, then tables, carts, baskets. Goods arranged in careful displays that are meant to attract attention, though not all of them succeed. Some tables are full, others noticeably sparse. The imbalance catches your eye immediately. You step closer, drawn into the flow. Markets during the Civil War years became essential hubs for both trade and information. A commonly accepted point is that inflation, particularly in the Confederacy, rose sharply as the war progressed, making everyday goods increasingly expensive and harder to obtain. Even in the North, supply disruptions created uneven availability. As you move through the crowd, you begin to see what that looks like in practice. A woman stands behind a table of vegetables, her hands resting lightly on the edge. The produce is modest in quantity, carefully arranged to appear fuller than it is. You notice how she watches each potential buyer, reading their interest, their hesitation. You pause near her stall, studying what is available. Potatoes slightly smaller than you might expect, a few onions, greens that look freshly picked but not abundant. You can sense the calculation already forming. What can you afford? What can you carry? What can you do without? Voices rise and fall around you. A man nearby argues quietly over the price of flour, his tone controlled but strained. The seller responds with equal firmness, explaining shortages, transport, difficulties, rising costs. Neither is entirely wrong. Neither is entirely satisfied. You shift your attention to another stall where fabric is displayed. The selection is limited colours, muted textures, uneven. You recall how clothing has already begun to show signs of strain, and here is where that strain becomes visible. Less choice, higher cost, greater care required in every purchase. There is an unusual detail noted in some accounts from this period. In certain regions, people began using alternative forms of exchange when currency lost value or became scarce. Bartering goods, trading services, even using handmade tokens. You glance around wondering if such exchanges are happening quietly here beneath the more visible transactions. You overhear a brief exchange that suggests as much. Two individuals speak softly, negotiating something that is not immediately clear. A basket of eggs is offered. In return, a piece of cloth perhaps, or labour promised at a later time. The agreement is sealed with a nod rather than a formal record. You move on, absorbing the atmosphere. The market is not just a place to buy and sell. It's a place to gather information. News travels here, carried by travellers, traders, and those passing through. You catch fragments of conversation as you walk. Talk of troop movements, uncertain and second-hand. Rumours of shortages in neighbouring towns. A mention of a shipment delayed or redirected. Each piece of information is incomplete, but together they form a shifting picture of the wider world. You pause near a group engaged in a more animated discussion. Their voices are still controlled, but the energy is higher. One person insists that conditions will improve soon. Another shakes their head, less convinced. You sense how much people rely on these exchanges, not just for facts, but for reassurance. Some analysts of the period have pointed out that rumour often travelled faster than verified news, shaping perceptions in ways that could either calm or unsettle entire communities. Standing here, you can feel that dynamic in motion. Information is currency just as much as anything laid out on these tables. You step toward a stall offering something warm, perhaps a simple prepared food. The scent draws you in, familiar yet faint. You exchange a few words, careful and polite, before receiving a small portion. It is not large, but it is enough. You take a bite, noticing how even here in a place of exchange, the same themes return. Careful portions, thoughtful use, nothing wasted. Nearby, a child watches closely as a transaction unfolds, eyes tracking every movement. Learning without being taught directly, you recognise that pattern now. You continue through the market, your senses fully engaged. The textures of goods under your fingers, the shifting tones of conversation, the subtle tension in each negotiation. There is also a visible contrast between those who have a little more and those who have less. It shows in posture, in confidence, in the way people approach the stalls. Some browse with measured interest. Others move quickly, focused, calculating every choice. You begin to understand that the market reflects more than supply and demand. It reflects the strain of the time, the adjustments people are forced to make, the quiet resilience that keeps everything moving. You reach the far edge where the crowd thins slightly. The noise softens, replaced by a more open quiet. You pause there, turning back for one last look. The movement continues. Buyers, sellers, voices, gestures. A living system adapting moment by moment. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle into you. This is not just commerce. It is survival, negotiation, connection, all woven together in a single space. As you step away, the sounds begin to fade behind you, replaced once again by the broader rhythm of the day. But something stays with you. An awareness that even in places meant for exchange, the war is present. Not in uniform or weapon, but in price, in scarcity, in the careful way people measure what they can afford to give and what they must hold back. You walk on carrying that understanding forward as the day continues to unfold around you. You leave the market behind, though. Its noise lingers faintly in your ears like an echo that takes time to settle. The road narrows again, the movement of people thinning out as you return toward quieter spaces. The rhythm shifts, less hurried now, more inward. Your thoughts drift almost naturally towards something more personal. Communication. You notice it first in a small, deliberate action. A man standing near a fence, unfolding a piece of paper with careful hands. His posture changes as he reads, shoulders tightening slightly, then easing. You cannot hear the words, but you feel their weight. Letters are the lifeline of this time. A well-documented truth is that during the Civil War, millions of letters travelled between soldiers and civilians, carried by expanding postal systems that worked with surprising efficiency despite the conflict. For many, these letters were the only connection to loved ones far away. You begin to understand how much rests inside those folded pages. You continue walking, drawn toward the quiet gravity of it. Inside a nearby home, you find someone seated by the window pen, in hand paper resting on a flat surface. The act of writing here is not casual. It requires intention. Ink must be prepared, the pen dipped carefully, each word formed with patience. You watch as the writer pauses, thinking, perhaps choosing how to say something difficult. There is no quick correction, no easy deletion. Every line carries permanence. You step closer, noticing the slight tremor in the hand, the way the pen hovers before touching the page again. Writing is not just about recording events. It is about shaping emotion into something that can travel across distance. You imagine the content, descriptions of daily life carefully softened to avoid causing worry, small reassurances, questions that may not be answered for weeks, if at all. There is an unusual detail that appears in some preserved letters from this era. Writers often cross their lines of text writing in one direction and then turning the page to write across it again to conserve paper. It creates a dense, almost woven pattern of words. You picture it now, the page filled edge to edge, nothing wasted. You move away quietly, leaving the writer to their thoughts. Outside, the afternoon light has begun to soften, casting longer shadows across the ground. You walk toward a shaded area where a small group has gathered. Their voices are low, their focus shared. One person holds a letter, reading aloud. The others listen closely, leaning in just slightly, the words become communal, extending beyond the individual to the group. News of a relative, a report from the front, a simple note of survival. You notice how reactions are contained but present. A nod, a brief closing of the eyes, a hand resting gently on another's arm. Emotion is expressed, but often in restrained ways. Some researchers suggest that letters during this period served not only as communication, but as emotional anchors, helping people maintain a sense of connection and continuity despite separation. As you stand there, you feel that role clearly. The reading ends, and for a moment there is silence, not empty but full. You step back, giving space again. Your attention shifts to another figure nearby, holding a letter that remains unopened. The paper is slightly worn at the edges, as if it has been carried for some time. The person turns it over, slowly, fingers tracing the seal. You sense hesitation. Opening a letter is not always a simple act. It carries possibility, relief, or something heavier. You realise how much courage it can take to break that seal. You watch as they finally do. The motion is careful, almost reverent. The paper unfolds and their eyes begin to move across the lines. You do not stay long enough to see the full reaction. It feels too private, even from a distance. You continue walking, your mind now filled with the quiet intensity of these exchanges. You think about the time it takes for a letter to travel. Days, sometimes weeks. By the time it arrives, the moment it describes may already have passed, changed, or been overtaken by something new. There's always a gap between what is written and what is now. That gap creates a kind of tension, a space where imagination fills in the unknown. You pass by a small structure that serves as a local post point. It's not large, not elaborate, but it holds significance. People come and go, some with letters in hand, others leaving empty, their expressions carefully neutral. You pause for a moment, observing the flow. Each letter represents a thread connecting lives across distance. Some threads are strong, reinforced by frequent exchange. Others are fragile, stretched thin by time and uncertainty. You begin to understand that communication here is not instant, not reliable in the way you might expect. It requires patience, trust, endurance, and yet it persists. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle into you. The words written, the words read, the words waiting to be spoken. As you move on, the day continues its steady progression. The sounds of work return, blending with the quieter tones of reflection. But something has shifted. You carry with you the sense that behind the lines, beyond the visible routines, there is a constant exchange of thought and feeling, travelling across distances both physical and emotional. You walk forward, the image of folded paper and careful handwriting lingering in your mind. A reminder that even in a world shaped by conflict, people reach for connection one letter at a time. You continue along the path, the quiet weight of letters still resting somewhere in your thoughts, when the sound of a bell reaches you. Soft at first, then clearer. It carries across the open air with a steady, measured rhythm that feels almost grounding. You follow it without thinking too much about why. The building comes into view gradually. Simple in structure, modest in size, yet unmistakable in purpose. A church. You step closer, noticing how people gather near the entrance, their movements slower now, more deliberate. There is a shift in posture and tone. Conversations soften, faces settle into something more reflective. Faith holds a strong place in daily life during this time. Church attendance is common across both the Union and the Confederacy, with services offering not only spiritual guidance, but also a sense of community and shared experience. As you approach, you begin to feel how this space functions differently from the others you have seen today. You enter quietly. Inside, the light changes. It filters through narrow windows, casting long, gentle shapes across wooden benches. The air feels cooler, stiller, carrying a faint scent of aged wood, and something softer, perhaps candle wax or worn fabric. You take a seat, the bench firm beneath you. Around you others settle in their movements, careful, almost synchronized. There is no rush. The pace here is intentionally slower, inviting a different kind of attention. A voice begins to speak from the front, calm, steady, measured. You listen not just to the words, but to the tone. It carries reassurance, but also something more searching. The subject touches on endurance, on hope, on the idea that suffering has meaning, though that meaning is not always clear. You notice how people respond. Some bow their heads slightly, others sit upright, eyes fixed forward. A few close their eyes entirely, as if retreating inward. There is a detail from this period that stands out. Religious gatherings often included prayers specifically for soldiers, for safety, for victory, or simply for survival. You can hear that thread woven into the service now, even if it is not always stated directly. You feel the tension in it. On one hand, there is comfort here, a shared belief, a structure that offers explanation and support. On the other, there are questions that linger beneath the surface. Questions about justice, about loss, about why this conflict exists at all. Some writers from the era describe sermons that framed the war as a test of faith, while others reveal a quieter uncertainty among congregations, where not everyone agreed on what the war meant in a moral sense. Sitting here, you sense both currents moving together, not fully resolved. A hymn begins. The sound rises gently, voices joining together in a way that feels both individual and collective. You follow along as best you can, the melody simple enough to catch the words, repeating in a steady pattern. There is something about the act of singing together that shifts the atmosphere. It creates a sense of unity, even if only for a few moments. Differences soften, replaced by a shared rhythm. You glance around, noticing small details. A hand resting on a warm book, a child leaning slightly against a parent, an older figure mouthing the words with practiced familiarity. There is also an interesting observation found in some accounts. Music during this time often blended religious themes with patriotic ones, especially as the war continued. Songs could carry both spiritual and national meaning, sometimes in ways that blurred the line between the two. You wonder how often those meanings overlap in the minds of the people around you. The hymn ends and the room settles again. You find yourself focusing on the quiet that follows. It's not empty. It feels full, almost dense with thought and feeling. You become aware of your own breathing slower now, matching the pace of the space. The service continues moving through readings, reflections, and moments of stillness. Time stretches in a different way, here less tied to tasks and more to presence. You begin to understand why people come, not just for answers but for pause, for a space where the constant movement of the day slows, allowing something deeper to surface. And yet even here the war is present. It appears in the words chosen in the prayers, offered in the subtle tension that never fully disappears. It is part of the fabric now woven into places that once might have felt separate from conflict. You shift slightly on the bench, feeling the firmness beneath you again. It grounds you, reminding you of the physical world even as your thoughts drift. The service gradually comes to a close. People rise slowly, gathering their belongings, exchanging quiet greetings. The tone remains subdued, respectful. There is no sudden return to noise, only a gentle transition back into the flow of the day. You step outside once more, the sunlight brighter after the dim interior. The air feels warmer, more active. The sounds of the world return, layered and varied. You take a moment to stand there between two spaces. Behind you, the calm of the church. Ahead, the steady movement of daily life. You feel a subtle shift within yourself, not a resolution, but a softening, a reminder that even in uncertain times, people seek meaning, connection, and a sense of something larger than themselves. You take a slow breath, letting it settle. Then you turn and continue on, carrying that quiet stillness with you as the day moves forward. You leave the calm of the gathering behind, though a trace of its stillness lingers in your chest. The afternoon has deepened, the light softer now, stretching across the ground in long quiet bands. As you walk, the rhythm of the day shifts again, drawing your attention towards something more fragile. Illness. You notice it first in the way a door remains half closed, not fully open to the world outside. Then in the lowered voices nearby, careful and subdued. There is a different kind of silence here, one that carries concern rather than rest. You step closer, hesitating only briefly before entering. Inside, the air feels warmer, heavier. The windows are partly covered, allowing just enough light to see by. A figure lies on a bed, motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of breathing. Another person sits nearby, hands folded tightly, watching. Health during this period is uncertain at best. A well-known reality is that medical knowledge in the 1860s remains limited, with germ theory not yet widely accepted. Many illnesses are treated based on tradition, observation and trial, rather than scientific understanding as you know it. You begin to see how that uncertainty shapes everything in this room. You move quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. On a small table you notice a collection of items, cloths, a basin of water, perhaps a bottle containing some kind of remedy. The arrangement is simple but deliberate. Each item has a role, even if its effectiveness is not always guaranteed. The person tending to the patient dips a cloth into the water, wrings it out and places it gently across the forehead. The motion is practiced, repeated many times before. There is a quiet patience in it, a willingness to do what can be done even when the outcome is uncertain. You watch closely, aware of how much care is being given without certainty of success. There is an unusual detail that appears in various accounts from the time. Home remedies often included ingredients that seem surprising now, such as onion poultices, herbal infusions, or mixtures of vinegar and honey. Some were based on long-standing traditions, others on simple experimentation. You glance again at the small table, wondering what each item represents. You step back slightly, giving space, and listen. The room is filled with small sounds. The soft movement of fabric, the quiet breath of the patient, the occasional whisper between those present. It creates a delicate atmosphere, one that feels both intimate and heavy. You begin to notice how illness affects not just the individual, but the entire household. Tasks shift, responsibilities redistribute. Someone must remain here watching, tending, waiting. Others take on additional work outside this room. Some historians suggest that disease and poor sanitation claimed more lives during the Civil War than battle itself, especially among soldiers. But civilians are not untouched by these realities. Outbreaks of illnesses such as dysentery, typhoid, and influenza affect communities, sometimes spreading quickly and unpredictably. You feel the presence of that risk here, even in this quiet space. You move toward the doorway again, not out of discomfort, but out of respect for the stillness inside. Outside, the air feels lighter by comparison, though the awareness follows you. You walk a short distance and notice another small group gathered, this time in conversation rather than silence. Their voices are low but steady. They discuss remedies, past experiences, what might help. Advice is shared carefully drawn from memory and personal knowledge rather than formal training. You realise how much of healthcare here depends on community. Information passes from one person to another, shaped by experience, adapted to circumstance. There is no central authority guiding every decision. People rely on what they know and what others have learned. You pause listening as someone describes a treatment that worked once before. Another offers a different suggestion, equally confident. The exchange is thoughtful but not always conclusive. You sense how much uncertainty is accepted as part of life. At the same time, there is a quiet determination. People do not simply wait. They act, they try, they adapt. Even when outcomes are unclear, effort continues. You walk on the conversation fading behind you, replaced once more by the broader sounds of the day. You notice how your own awareness has shifted. The simple act of walking now feels layered with new meaning. Health is not something assumed. It is something maintained, protected, sometimes lost without warning. You take a slow breath, appreciating the steadiness of it. The sun continues its gradual descent, the light softening further. Shadows lengthen, stretching across the ground, like quiet reminders of time passing. You glance back once toward the house you left behind, its door still partly closed. Then you turn forward again, stepping into the next moment of the day, carrying with you a deeper understanding of how fragile and how carefully tended life can be in this world. You walk farther from the cluster of homes, the path opening into a wider stretch of land where the horizon feels closer than before. The air shifts again, carrying fewer voices, more space. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful. Then you hear it. At first, it is so faint you wonder if you imagined it. A low, distant thud followed by a pause. Then another. Not close, not immediate, but unmistakable once you notice it. Cannon fire. You stop without thinking, your body reacting before your mind fully catches up. The sound travels slowly, softened by distance, yet it carries a weight that settles deep in your chest. You listen again, holding still. Another dull boom rolls across the landscape, followed by a faint echo that dissolves into the air. This is how the war reaches you here. Not through direct sight, not through immediate danger, but through sound. A reminder that somewhere beyond what you can see, something large and violent, is unfolding. You stand there aware of the contrast. The quiet ground beneath your feet, the open sky above, and somewhere beyond conflict. It creates a strange tension, one that is both distant and immediate. Accounts from civilians during the Civil War often mention hearing battles from afar, especially in regions closer to active campaigns. Sound could travel for miles under the right conditions, carrying with it a sense of proximity that was difficult to ignore. You begin to understand how unsettling that must feel day after day. You take a slow breath, your senses sharpening. The wind shifts slightly, and with it comes another layer of sound. Not just the deep boom of artillery, but something more rhythmic, faint but steady. Marching. You strain to hear it more clearly, catching the pattern. Feet against ground, moving in unison. It is not loud, not overwhelming, but it carries a certain order that stands out against the natural sounds around you. You imagine the column of soldiers, somewhere beyond the trees, moving with purpose, following commands you cannot hear. There is a small but telling detail found in several personal recollections. Some civilians describe being able to distinguish different types of sounds over time, learning to recognise the difference between distant artillery musket fire and even the movement of troops. It becomes a kind of unwanted familiarity. You listen again, wondering if you will begin to notice those differences too. The sounds fade slightly, then return, carried unevenly by the air. It is not constant. It comes and goes like a distant storm that never quite arrives, but never fully disappears either. You begin to walk again, slower now, more aware of each step. The landscape around you seems unchanged, yet it feels different. The same trees, the same fields, but now layered with an invisible presence. You realise that the war does not need to be seen to be felt. It exists in these subtle intrusions, these reminders that reach into ordinary moments. You pass by another figure standing still, head tilted slightly, listening just as you were. There is no need for words. The understanding is shared. After a moment, they turn and continue on as you do. Life does not stop for these sounds. It adjusts around them. You notice how quickly people return to their tasks, how the rhythm of work resumes, even as the echoes linger. It is not indifference. It is adaptation. A way of continuing despite the constant reminder. Some observers of the time noted that repeated exposure to distant conflict could dull immediate reactions, not because the danger was less, but because daily life demanded attention. As you move forward, you sense that balance. Awareness without paralysis. The sun dips slightly lower, its light warmer, now casting a golden tone across the ground. It contrasts with the heaviness of what you have heard, creating a moment that feels almost unreal. You pause again, this time not to listen, but to take in the scene as a whole. A field stretching quietly before you, a fence line marking its edge, the sky wide and open clouds drifting slowly, and beneath it all, the faint memory of sound. You realise how much this shapes perception. Even when the noise fades, the awareness remains. It changes how you interpret silence, how you understand distance. You begin to walk back toward the more familiar paths, the sounds of daily life gradually returning. Voices, movement, the steady rhythm of work. The echoes of the distant battle grow softer, then disappear entirely. But they do not leave you. You carry them with you, not as a sharp fear, but as a quiet understanding. A reminder that behind the lines does not mean untouched. It means connected in ways that are not always visible. You take a slow breath, letting it out evenly. The day continues as it always does. And you continue with it now, more aware of the unseen threads that tie this place to something far beyond the horizon. You turn back toward the cluster of homes as the light softens further, the day easing into that gentle stretch between work and rest. The sounds shift again, less driven now, more relaxed though never entirely free of tension. It is a different kind of gathering that draws your attention this time. Not a market, not a service. Something quieter, social. You follow the faint murmur of voices to a shaded yard where a few chairs have been arranged in a loose circle. A small table stands nearby holding simple refreshments. Nothing elaborate, but enough to suggest intention. This is not just passing conversation. It is a moment carved out of the day. You approach slowly, sensing the subtle balance of the scene. People greet one another with small nods, brief smiles, gestures that carry familiarity without excess. There is a shared understanding here. Time is limited, energy is precious, but connection still matters. You take a seat at the edge, listening. The conversation begins lightly. Weather, of course. It always seems to come first, then small updates. A relative doing well, a task completed, a piece of news mentioned without too much detail. It feels almost rehearsed, as if everyone is easing into something deeper without rushing. Social visits during this period often serve multiple purposes. They provide a break from labour, a chance to exchange information, and a way to maintain bonds that might otherwise weaken under strain. even brief gatherings like this carry importance beyond what they appear to be. You notice how carefully people choose their words. Laughter appears, but it is softer than you might expect. It does not burst out, it unfolds gently, shared, but contained. You find yourself smiling along, drawn into the rhythm. A plate is passed round, holding small portions of food. You take one, noting again how everything is measured, considered. Even in moments meant for relaxation, the habits of scarcity remain. There is an interesting detail preserved in some personal writings from the time. Despite shortages, people often made an effort to offer something however small to guests. Hospitality did not disappear, it adapted. A handful of biscuits, a slice of something sweet, if ingredients allowed. The gesture mattered as much as the item itself. You watch as one person pours a drink, careful not to spill a drop. Another adjusts a chair, making space for someone arriving late. These small actions create a sense of care that extends beyond words. The conversation shifts gradually. Someone mentions a letter received earlier in the day. Heads turn slightly, attention focusing. The details are shared, not loudly, but with quiet significance. A loved one's safe for now. A brief description of conditions far away. Relief passes through the group, subtle but real. Then another voice adds a different note. News less certain, less reassuring. The tone changes again, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. A pause follows, as if everyone is adjusting to the new information. You begin to understand how these gatherings function as a kind of emotional exchange. Not just facts, but feelings. Shared, balanced, absorbed. Some commentators on the era have suggested that maintaining social rituals helped stabilize communities during periods of upheaval. Others point out that such gatherings could also reveal underlying tensions, especially in areas where loyalties were divided. As you sit here, you sense both possibilities present, though not fully expressed. You notice a brief moment of hesitation in the conversation. A topic approaches something more sensitive, then gently turns away. It is not avoidance exactly, it is navigation. You lean back slightly, observing how people manage this balance. A story is told. Next, something lighter drawn from everyday life. A small mishap retold with gentle humour. It draws a more relaxed response, easing the atmosphere. You can feel the shift, the collective exhale. Children move at the edges of the gathering, quieter now than before, sensing the tone. They listen, absorbing, without interrupting, learning how these interactions unfold. The light continues to change the shadows, stretching longer across the ground. The air cools slightly, carrying the scent of earth and evening. You become aware of how time is passing, not marked by clocks, but by the slow dimming of the day. The gathering begins to loosen. People rise gradually, not all at once. Chairs are moved back, items collected, small farewells exchanged. There is no formal ending, just a natural unfolding. You stand as well, offering a nod, a quiet acknowledgement. As you step away, you carry with you the feeling of that space. Not entirely carefree, not untouched by the war, but still holding something essential. Connection. You walk back along the path, the sounds of the gathering fading behind you, replaced by the softer tones of evening settling in. And you realise that even in a time defined by conflict, people still seek moments like this, not to escape reality, but to steady themselves within it. A fragile normalcy maintained through shared presence, careful words, and the simple act of sitting together as the day comes to a close. You move farther along the path, the warmth of the small gathering still lingering faintly in your thoughts when the atmosphere begins to tighten again. It is subtle at first, a shift in how people look at one another, a pause that lasts just a little longer than before. You feel it before you fully understand it. Something about this place is more watchful. You pass between two homes where voices are low, almost too low to follow. The conversation stops entirely as you approach, then resumes once you move past. It is not unfriendly, it is cautious. You begin to notice how often this happens. In a time where loyalties are divided, trust becomes something that must be measured carefully. Not everyone speaks freely, and not everyone listens without judgment. The war may be distant in sound, but here it shapes relationships in quieter, more complicated ways. You slow your pace, paying closer attention. A man stands near a fence, speaking with another. Their posture is relaxed, but their eyes move frequently, scanning their surroundings. They are aware of who is near, who might overhear. The conversation continues, but with a certain restraint. You realise that information is not only shared carefully, it is also guarded. In border regions, especially where communities contain both Union and Confederate sympathisers, suspicion can become part of daily life. People learn to speak in ways that reveal just enough but not too much. You can feel that balance in nearly every interaction. You pass a small group gathered near a well. Their discussion is quiet, but there is a tension in it, an undercurrent that does not fully surface. One person gestures slightly, another responds with a brief nod. The exchange ends quickly, as if lingering would invite risk. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some accounts from the period. Informal networks of informants existed in certain areas where individuals reported on neighbours suspected of supporting the opposing side. It was not always organised, not always consistent, but it was enough to create an atmosphere of uncertainty. You feel that uncertainty now, not as fear exactly, but as awareness. You adjust your posture slightly, becoming more mindful of your own presence, where you stand, how long you linger, what you might say. It changes the way you move through the space. A door opens nearby and a woman steps out, pausing briefly before crossing the yard. She glances around, not hurriedly but deliberately. Her expression remains calm, but her attention is active. You sense that this is not unusual. You continue walking, your senses tuned to these subtle cues. Even simple interactions carry layers. A greeting may be friendly but measured. A question may be asked but with care. You begin to understand that communication here often operates on more than one level. You recall the earlier gathering, the careful way conversation shifted away from certain topics. It makes more sense now. It is not just politeness, it is protection. Some observers of the time have noted that divided communities often developed complex social codes, allowing people to navigate differences without direct confrontation. Others describe moments when those codes broke down, leading to conflict within neighbourhoods themselves. As you move through this space, you sense how fragile that balance can be. You stop briefly near a fence line, watching as two individuals exchange a folded paper. The motion is quick, almost discreet. No words are spoken. The paper disappears into a pocket, and the moment passes as if it never happened. You do not know what was written or why it was exchanged in that way, but you understand that not all communication is meant to be visible. The air feels cooler now, the evening settling in more fully. Shadows deepen, softening the edges of everything around you. It creates a kind of cover, though not complete. You notice how people begin to move indoors one by one. Doors close, windows dim. The open spaces grow quieter, but not entirely still. There is a sense that life continues behind those walls, just as it did earlier in the day. Conversations, decisions, quiet moments of reflection, all shaped by the same underlying awareness. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle into you. This is another layer of life behind the lines. Not just work, not just routine, but the constant navigation of trust and caution, knowing when to speak, when to listen, when to remain silent. You begin to walk again, your steps softer now, as if matching the tone of the evening. The path leads you back toward the more familiar ground, though it does not feel quite the same anymore. You carry with you a deeper understanding of how relationships are shaped in times like this. Not broken entirely, but altered, adjusted to fit a world where certainty is rare. You glance once more at the houses behind you, their shapes now outlined by fading light. Then you turn forward, continuing into the quiet of the evening, where the next part of the day waits to unfold. You continue along the dimming path, the quiet watchfulness of the last moments still lingering in your mind, when something else begins to take shape ahead of you. Not a gathering, not a routine task, but movement. Slow, uneven, and heavy in a way that feels different from everything you have seen so far. A wagon comes into view. It is not unusual to see wagons in this world. They carry goods, tools, supplies. But this one feels different the moment you notice it. The pace is slower. The load is not neatly arranged. Figures walk beside it, not speaking much, their posture marked by exhaustion rather than purpose. You step aside, giving them space as they pass. Their clothing is worn more than what you have seen in the market or the fields. Not just patched, but strained as if pushed beyond its usual limits. Faces carry a look that is hard to define at first. Not just tired, something deeper. Displacement. You realize what you are seeing. Families moving away from somewhere they could no longer remain. The war has created waves of displacement across many regions, forcing civilians to leave homes that once felt permanent. In areas affected by troop movements, destruction, or shifting control, entire communities have been uprooted. You begin to understand that this movement is not rare, it is part of the larger pattern. You watch as the wagon continues its wheels, turning slowly over the uneven ground. A child walks beside it, one hand resting lightly against the side, as if to steady both the wagon and themselves. Another figure sits inside, surrounded by what little has been carried along. You notice how little that is. A few bundles, some tools, perhaps a piece of furniture carefully tied down. Everything reduced to what can be moved, what can be saved. There is a small detail mentioned in several personal accounts from the time. Families often had to make rapid decisions about what to take, when leaving sometimes with only hours to prepare. Items of sentimental value were chosen alongside practical necessities, creating a mix that reflects both survival and memory. You can almost see those choices here in the objects that have made the journey. You follow the wagon with your eyes as it passes, feeling a quiet weight settle in your chest. The road behind them is not visible to you, but you sense it. The place they left, the reasons they left. Not all of it is known even to them. You continue walking, but your pace slows. Ahead, you see another small group gathered near the side of the road. They are speaking with those from the wagon, offering something. Water perhaps, a bit of food. The exchange is simple but meaningful. You step closer, observing. There are no formal introductions, no extended conversation, just gestures of assistance, accepted with quiet gratitude. It is a brief moment of connection between those who remain and those who are passing through. You notice how quickly it ends. The wagon moves on, group disperses, and the road returns to its usual rhythm. But something has shifted. You begin to understand how common this must be. Movement, arrival, departure. Stories crossing paths without fully settling. Some observers of the period have noted that displaced civilians often carried not just physical belongings but news rumours and experiences that spread from place to place. As they moved, they became part of the flow of information, shaping how others understood the war. You can imagine how each encounter adds another layer to the collective awareness. You walk a little farther, the evening deepening around you. The sky has taken on softer tones now, the light fading gradually. It casts everything in a muted glow, blurring the edges of what you see. You pass by a small area where someone has set up a temporary resting place. A blanket laid out, a few items arranged nearby. It's not a permanent home, but it serves for the moment. You pause there, looking at the simplicity of it. You think about what it means to lose a fixed place, to carry your life with you in this way, to wake each day in a different location, uncertain of what comes next. There is a quiet resilience in it, but also a deep strain. You take a slow breath, feeling the coolness of the evening air. The sounds of the day have softened now. Fewer voices, less movement. The world is settling, but not entirely at rest. You glance back once more down the road, though the wagon is no longer visible. It has become part of the distance, just as so many others must have. You turn forward again, continuing your walk, your steps measured and steady. And as you move into the gathering dusk, you carry with you the image of that passing moment. Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply human. A reminder that behind the lines, life is not only about staying, it is also about leaving, about moving, about finding a way forward even when the ground beneath you has changed. You continue along the road as evening settles more fully, the sky dimming into softer shades when a new kind of movement begins to reveal itself. Not hurried, not chaotic, but purposeful in a different way. You hear it first this time, a distant rumble that does not fade like the sounds of battle. It grows steadier as you walk. Then you see it, a train. It cuts across the landscape on iron tracks that seem almost out of place among the fields and dirt paths. The motion is smooth compared to everything else you have experienced today, the cars linked together in a long continuous line. It feels modern in a way that contrasts sharply with the slower rhythms around it. You stop for a moment watching. Railroads had already begun transforming transportation before the war, but during the conflict they became even more crucial. Troop supplies and information moved along these lines with a speed that reshaped how distance was understood. You begin to sense how this machine alters the scale of everything. The train passes, its sound steady, its presence undeniable. You notice the details, the worn surfaces of the cars, the faint markings, the figures visible through openings. Some passengers sit quietly, others look outward, their expressions difficult to read at this distance. You wonder where they are going and what has brought them here. There is a small but intriguing note found in various records from the time. Telegraph lines often ran alongside railroad tracks, forming a network that allowed messages to travel almost instantly compared to letters. You glance upward, noticing the thin wires stretching between poles, nearly invisible against the fading sky. It creates a layered system of movement, physical and informational, both flowing across the same routes. You begin walking again, your attention drawn to those lines. A series of poles stands at regular intervals, each one supporting the wire that connects one place to another. You imagine the messages travelling along it. Brief, coded, efficient. Not like the careful, emotional letters you saw earlier. This is something else entirely. You pass near a small telegraph station, modest in size, but active in its own quiet way. Inside, a figure sits at a table, hand poised over a device that clicks softly in a steady rhythm. You pause at the doorway, listening. The sound is precise, almost mechanical, yet it carries meaning. Each click represents a letter, a word, a piece of information moving across distance, faster than anything else in this world. The operator's focus is intense, eyes fixed, movements controlled. There is no room for distraction here. Accuracy matters. You watch for a moment aware that you are witnessing something that changes how people understand time and space. Some historians have emphasized how the telegraph allowed military leaders to coordinate actions more effectively, while others highlight its impact on civilian awareness, bringing news faster than ever before. Standing here, you sense both aspects at once. The operator pauses briefly, then resumes the clicking, continuing with steady precision. You step back, letting the scene settle into your understanding. Outside, the air has cooled further, the evening now firmly in place. The last traces of daylight linger along the horizon, fading slowly. You walk along the line of poles for a short distance, your eyes following the wire as it stretches into the distance. It connects places you cannot see, carrying messages you cannot hear. It feels almost invisible, yet powerful. You begin to reflect on how different forms of communication coexist here. The slow, careful letters, the immediate coded signals of the telegraph, the spoken words shared in markets and gatherings, each one serving a purpose, each one shaping how people experience the war. You pass by another section of track, now quiet after the train has gone. The ground beside it is worn, marked by repeated use. It stands as a reminder of movement, of connection, even in stillness. You take a slow breath, the cool air settling in your lungs. The day has carried you through many layers of life behind the lines. Work, conversation, care, caution, and now this. A glimpse of something that reaches beyond the immediate, linking distant places in ways that feel almost unfamiliar. You turn away from the tracks, returning to the path that leads back toward the homes and fields. The sounds of the telegraph fade behind you, replaced once again by the softer tones of evening. And as you walk, you carry with you the sense that even in a world defined by distance and delay, there are threads that move quickly, quietly, shaping events in ways not always seen. You step forward and the ground steady beneath you, the night beginning to settle. You leave the quiet line of poles behind and follow the familiar path back toward the fields, where the land itself seems to breathe more slowly as evening approaches. The sky deepens into softer tones and the air carries that faint cooling touch that signals the day is beginning to rest. But the land does not rest in the same way people do. You step onto the edge of a field, pausing as you take in the rows stretching ahead of you. Even in this dimming light, you can see the careful order of planting the lines drawn by hands that have worked this soil repeatedly, season after season. Agriculture shapes life here in ways that feel both constant and vulnerable. One clear reality of the time is that the Civil War disrupted farming across large parts of the country, especially in the South, where labour systems shifted and supplies became uncertain. You can see that disruption not as a single dramatic change, but as a series of small imbalances. Some rows look strong, others less so. You step forward, your feet brushing lightly against the earth. It feels dry in some places, packed in others. The condition of the soil tells its own story, one of effort, weather and strain. You kneel briefly, touching the ground again, as you did earlier in the day. It feels different now, cooler, quieter, holding the memory of the sun that warmed it for hours. You notice how the plants themselves reflect the uncertainty of the time. Some grow steadily, others struggle. Gaps appear where something failed to take root or could not be maintained. It is not a perfect system. It is an ongoing negotiation with nature. There is an interesting observation found in some accounts from this period. In areas where traditional crops became harder to sustain, people sometimes shifted to planting alternatives that required fewer resources or could grow more reliably under strained conditions. It was not always ideal, but it allowed fields to remain productive. You rise again, looking out across the land. The work here is tied to seasons in a way that does not change even during war. Planting must happen at the right time. Harvest cannot be delayed without consequence. The land does not adjust to human conflict. It continues its cycle, indifferent to the struggles around it. You hear movement nearby and turn to see someone working even now in the fading light. Their motions are slower than earlier, but steady. A final check, perhaps, a last task before the day ends. You watch for a moment, noticing the quiet determination in each movement. There is no sense of rushing, but also no sense of stopping too soon. Some researchers have pointed out that the strain on agriculture during the war led to long-term changes in how land was managed, though those changes were not always immediate or evenly distributed. Standing here, you sense that you are seeing the process in motion, not yet resolved. You walk along the edge of the field, following the line where cultivated land meets the untamed growth beyond. It creates a boundary that feels both clear and fragile. The sky darkens further, the first hints of evening settling in more fully. Colours soften, details blur slightly, and the world seems to quiet in response. You pause again, looking out over the rows one last time. You think about what it takes to sustain this. The labour, the planning, the uncertainty. Each season carries its own risks, even without the added pressure of war. With it, those risks multiply. You imagine the coming harvest. Will it be enough? Will it hold? Will it reach those who need it? There are no easy answers here, only ongoing effort. You turn back towards the path, your steps slower now, matching the calm of the evening. The sounds of the field fade behind you, replaced once again by the softer tones of homes preparing for night. As you walk, you carry with you the image of the land, not as a backdrop, but as a central part of life, a source of sustenance, but also of uncertainty. You begin to understand how closely everything is tied to it. Food work, stability, even hope. The path leads you onward, the last light of the day slipping gently toward the horizon. And as you move forward, you feel the quiet weight of the seasons themselves, continuing their cycle, steady and unbroken, even in a time defined by change. You follow the path back toward the cluster of homes, the last light of day slipping away, replaced by the soft grey of early night. The air is cooled enough now that each breath feels calmer, slower. Yet beneath that calm, something heavier begins to take shape. You notice it in the way people move, quieter, more deliberate. A small group gathers near a house, not in the easy rhythm of a social visit, but in a stillness that feels different. You approach carefully, instinctively, lowering your steps, your presence. There is no laughter here, only quiet voices and long pauses between them. You stand at a respectful distance, observing. Mourning during this time is a deeply personal, yet widely shared experience. With so many lives affected by the war, loss becomes a common thread running through communities. It is not always marked by large ceremonies. Often it unfolds in smaller, more intimate ways like this. You see a figure seated near the doorway, hands resting in their lap, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the immediate space. Others stand nearby, offering presence more than words. There is a kind of understanding that does not need to be spoken. You feel it immediately. The absence, someone who should be here but is not. You notice small details, a chair left empty, a piece of clothing folded carefully and set aside, objects that now carry more meaning than before. There is a quiet ritual in how people respond. A hand placed gently on a shoulder, a nod exchanged, a brief embrace that lingers just long enough to offer support, then releases without drawing attention. You step slightly closer still at the edge, sensing that this moment is not meant to be interrupted. In the 1860s, mourning customs often included wearing dark clothing, especially black, as a visible sign of loss. In some cases, these practices could last for months or even years, depending on the relationship. You glance at the group, again noticing the subtle presence of darker fabrics, the absence of brighter tones. The symbolism is quiet but clear. You shift your gaze to the ground where the earth has been disturbed slightly, though not in a way that immediately explains itself. You realise that not all losses are marked by visible graves nearby. Many families receive news of death without ever seeing the place where it occurred. This creates a different kind of mourning, one shaped by distance, by imagination, by the absence of physical closure. There is a detail found in some personal writings from the era that reflects this. Families would sometimes create memorial spaces within their homes, small areas where they could remember those who had died far away. A photograph, a letter, a personal item. You can almost picture that here, even if you cannot see it directly. You listen as a voice begins to speak softly. It is not a formal speech, not structured, more like a sharing of memory. A story about the person who is gone, something simple, something human. Others nod, adding small pieces, building a shared remembrance. You feel how this process works, not to erase the loss, but to hold it together, to give it shape within the group. Some writers who studied this period have noted that communal mourning helped individuals cope with the scale of loss brought by the war, while others suggest that repeated exposure to grief could also deepen emotional strain over time. As you stand here, you sense both truths again layered into the moment. The night deepens slightly, the sky now a darker shade with only the faintest trace of light remaining. A candle is lit near the doorway, its glow soft and steady. It adds a gentle warmth to the scene, illuminating faces without harshness. You notice how people begin to shift, not leaving entirely, but adjusting their positions, settling into a quieter form of presence. The initial intensity softens though the weight remains. You take a slow breath, feeling the stillness settle into you. This is another part of life behind the lines. Not just the routines and the work, but the moments when everything pauses, when loss becomes the centre of attention, even if only for a while. You step back, slightly giving space once more. The group remains their quiet vigil continuing. You turn gently, your movement slow, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of the moment. As you walk away, the soft glow of the candle remains visible for a few steps, then fades as you move farther along the path. The night surrounds you now, calm on the surface, yet carrying everything you have seen throughout the day. And you carry it too. The sounds, the faces, the quiet strength, and the quiet sorrow, all woven together into a single continuous experience. You continue forward the path, guiding you into the deeper hours of evening, where the day finally begins to rest. You walk deeper into the night, the world now softened by darkness, the edges of things less defined. The path beneath your feet is familiar enough, yet it feels different without the guidance of daylight. Sounds carry farther now, a distant door closing, a quiet murmur behind a wall, the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a light breeze. You begin to notice how the day settles into something more inward. Inside the homes, you pass light flickers through windows, dim and warm. It's not bright enough to spill far into the night, but enough to suggest life continuing within. You imagine the scenes inside, people sitting quietly, perhaps speaking in low voices, perhaps not speaking at all. This is when the mind begins to wander. The physical work of the day has slowed, but the thoughts it leaves behind remain active. You feel it in yourself, that subtle shift from movement to reflection. The emotional strain of living through this time is not always visible during the day. Tasks fill the hours, keeping attention focused outward. But at night, when activity fades, there is more space for thought, more room for worry. Some records from the period describe how civilians experienced ongoing anxiety, not always expressed openly, but present in letters, diaries, and personal reflections. The uncertainty of the war, the absence of loved ones, the unpredictability of news, all of it settles in during these quieter moments. You slow your pace, letting the stillness take hold. You pass by a window where someone sits alone, their posture slightly bent forward, hands resting in their lap. The candle beside them burns steadily, its light illuminating only a small circle. Their face is calm, but there is something distant in their gaze. You do not linger. You understand that this is a private space, even from the outside. You continue walking, your steps softer now, matching the quiet of the night. There is a small but telling detail found in some accounts from this time. People often turn to repetitive activities in the evening, such as sewing, reading, or simple tasks, not only for productivity, but as a way to steady the mind. The rhythm of these actions provided a kind of comfort. You imagine that now, behind those walls, a needle moving through fabric, pages turning slowly, hands working in quiet patterns that give shape to the passing hours. You feel your own thoughts shifting, becoming slower, more reflective. The events of the day begin to layer themselves in your mind. The work, the market, the letters, the distant sound of cannon fire, the faces of those you passed, the moments of connection and caution. They do not disappear, they settle. You reach a point where the path opens slightly, offering a view of the sky above. It is darker now, scattered with faint points of light. The air feels cooler, calmer. You pause, looking upward. There is something grounding in this, something that exists beyond the immediate concerns of the day. The sky remains unchanged even as everything below it shifts. You take a slow breath, feeling the stillness deepen. At the same time, you sense how difficult it can be to fully rest in a time like this. Even in quiet moments, there is an awareness that things can change. News can arrive, conditions can shift. Tomorrow may not be the same as today. Some observers have suggested that this constant awareness creates a kind of low, persistent tension, one that shapes how people think and feel over time. It is not always overwhelming, but it is rarely absent. You begin walking again, your pace unhurried. The path leads you back toward the place where your day began, though it feels different now. Not just a physical return, but a reflection of everything you have seen and understood. You notice how the sounds of the night have settled into a steady pattern, insects' distant movement, the soft creak of wood as homes adjust to the cooling air. It is not silence, it is a different kind of sound. You feel your body relaxing slightly, though your mind remains aware. You reach the familiar doorway, pausing for a moment before stepping inside. The room is dim, the fire reduced to a soft glow. Shadows move gently along the walls, shaped by the remaining light. You take a seat, letting the quiet surround you. This is the end of the day, but not the end of the experience. Everything you have seen continues to exist even as you rest. You take another slow breath, letting it out gradually. And in that moment, you begin to understand how people carry this with them. Not all at once, not in overwhelming waves, but in steady, manageable pieces. Enough to continue, enough to wake again tomorrow. You sit in the dim glow of the fading fire, the last embers shifting softly, casting a gentle light that barely reaches the corners of the room. The day has finally slowed to a near standstill. Outside, the night settles, fully wrapping everything in a quiet that feels deeper than before. You lean back slightly, allowing your body to rest, though your thoughts continue their slow, steady movement. There is a sense, not quite spoken but present, that something is changing. not just in this moment, but in the larger shape of things. The war which has filled every part of the day in ways both visible and hidden does not feel endless, even if its end is not yet clear. You notice it in the conversations you have heard, in the way people speak of time now. Not just of today or tomorrow, but of what might come after. There is a widely recognised turning point in these later years of the war, as shifts in leadership resources and momentum begin to alter its direction. While you do not see those changes directly here, you feel their presence in the background like a distant current beginning to move more strongly. You look around the room, again taking in the familiar details. The table, the chair, the small objects placed carefully where they belong. Nothing has changed here in a dramatic way, and yet everything feels slightly different. You realise that the change is not in the objects, but in the way they are held in the mind. You think about the people you have encountered throughout the day, the careful routines of the morning, the measured work in the fields, the quiet exchanges in the market, the letters, the gathering, the moments of caution, the weight of loss. Each one feels complete on its own, yet also part of something larger. There is an interesting reflection found in some writings from the period. As the war progressed, many civilians began to think more actively about what life would look like afterward. Not just in terms of victory or defeat, but in the simple question of how to return to something like normal life. You let that idea settle. What does normal even mean now? You imagine the fields in another season, perhaps more stable, perhaps still uncertain. You imagine the market with fuller tables, or at least steadier prices. You imagine letters carrying different kinds of news, not just survival, but return. At the same time, you sense that not everything will return as it was. The changes you have seen today feel too deep, too woven into daily life to simply disappear. Roles have shifted, expectations have adjusted, experiences have left their mark. Some analysts suggest that the end of the war brought both relief and new challenges as communities had to rebuild not only structures but relationships. Others emphasize the persistence of certain hardships even after the fighting stopped. Sitting here, you can understand why both perspectives exist. You shift slightly, feeling the quiet creak of the chair beneath you. The fire dims further, its light softer now, almost fading. You take a slow breath, letting your thoughts settle into a calmer rhythm. Outside, the night continues steady and unchanged. The same sky stretches above the same quiet sounds moving through the darkness. You begin to feel a gentle sense of closure, not as an ending, but as a pause. A moment where everything you have experienced gathers into a single quiet awareness. You have moved through a day that reflects an entire way of life. Not the dramatic moments of battle, but the steady, persistent reality of living behind the lines. The routines, the adjustments, the small acts that sustain everything. You let your eyes rest on the fading glow of the embers, and as the light continues to soften, you allow your thoughts to slow with it. The details begin to blur slightly, not disappearing, but settling into a quieter form. The sound of distant movement fades, the memory of voices softens, the weight of the day becomes lighter, more manageable. You feel your body relax further, the tension of awareness easing into something calmer. You take one more slow breath, then another, each one deeper, more even. The room grows darker, the fire nearly gone now, leaving only a faint trace of warmth. And in this quiet, you begin to drift. The world of the day remains, but it no longer presses as strongly. It becomes something you can hold gently without strain. You rest there between memory and stillness, letting the experience settle fully. The night continues around you calm and steady, and slowly, softly you let go of the day. Now as everything quiets even further, the story itself begins to soften with you. You can almost feel the rhythm of the day fading into a gentler pattern, like footsteps growing slower then still. The fields, the homes, the distant sounds all seem to drift into a quiet distance, no longer demanding your attention. Your breathing becomes the only steady motion you notice, calm and even matching the peaceful stillness around you. The weight of everything you have seen does not disappear, but it settles into something lighter, something you can carry without effort. The soft glow of memory lingers like the last ember of a fire that has done its work. And now there is nothing more you need to do. No tasks waiting, no decisions to make. Just rest. Let the quiet hold you gently without urgency. Let the sounds fade completely. Let the day become a distant echo softened by time. And as you drift further into that calm, you remain here safe in this moment, wrapped in the stillness of a world at rest. Sweet dreams.